Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about this section, which is going to be about communism. Of course, we learned about the Industrial Revolution really starting off in England. We learned that after the Industrial Revolution, there was this split in terms of the social classes, the elite, middle class. Middle classes really introduced to society, and there was a huge amount of human flourishing that occurs due to the Industrial Revolution, but a lot of it does not happen in the first few decades of the Industrial Revolution. So what you get is you get a split between the rich and the poor that is better than it was before the Industrial Revolution, but still, definitely showed problems. Now, Adam Smith, as we know, came around and said, "Well, look, you need productivity, you need specialized tasks, you need the market using itself and exchanges to decide what happens to prices and regulations." And he developed the idea of capitalism, private people owning land, labor, capital. Problem is that there were people that looked and said, this is all really not good. In fact, it's bad. And so what you get here is the bad parts of capitalism. You have these upper end people known as the bourgeois, the owners, the rich, the middle class. They seem to be not doing the heavy lifting, while down below, the working class and the poor, the proletariat, they are actually the ones that do all the work. And capitalism isn't working because it's only working for the elites, while the majority of the population is busting their behind trying to keep the whole thing afloat. And Karl Marx is walking around Manchester, England around the time of the Industrial Revolution. He's seen all this division, all this poverty, and he's kind of like, this is not how it should be. We should have a different part of society. There should be no one that is homeless, no one that is super poor in the society. So he comes and he starts to realize, man, what if the problem is that you have these working class and the poor, the proletariat, and what if like the entire course of history was just being these classes of people have always been here, and that the rich and middle class have always just kind of ran things? And what if there actually needs to be a revolution against that? So when you talk about communism, the first thing you need to understand is that the bourgeoisie are the middle class and the rich. They are the ones that own, they are the ones with leisure time, they are the ones with all the wealth and the happiness. And the working class is the ones that all the work, and they get abused and exploited, and they are poor. So Karl Marx writes a book in connection with Frederick Engels, but you don't have to know Frederick Engels as much. But he writes something called the Communist Manifesto. And in it, he outlines the ideas that basically government should determine how land, labor, and capital are distributed. And this is the basis for the concept of socialism. But you actually need a government, and he kind of goes to the extreme in terms of a government that will actually do this. And he outlines three pillars of communism. Number one, history has always been the haves versus the have nots. It's always been about the class struggle, the oppressor and the oppressed, the colonizer and the colonized, the freeman and the slave. Throughout history, it's just been haves versus have nots. And if we're going to get to some kind of like good space, then what needs to happen is needs to be like class struggle that needs to be overthrown. So in his idea, basically people are born in a natural state of cooperation. This is the idea of tribal communism. Then over time, imperialism happens. And imperialism is basically the act of taking land, labor, and capital by force by some power. Okay. And Marx basically says, look, this is always going to happen because the strong are going to take away from the weak. And so you're going to get countries that are stronger, or people that are stronger, or the rich people that are stronger. They're going to take away from the weak. And that's going to be the act of imperialism. Then you're going to put these people that are rich and keep them in a place in society, and the poor down low. So you have feudalism. Remember, feudalism was the clergy, the kings, the nobles, who would be considered the bourgeoisie, and then the peasants, who would be considered the proletariat. And then, of course, for hundreds of years, you've had this feudalism, and eventually there gets to be too many peasants, and so you do capitalism, where you give that peasants like a form of hope, and you call them working class, and they get a little bit of money, but they still get exploited because of their work. And eventually, capitalism gets people so furious that they revolt against the system. They create socialism, and eventually they create true communism, a true communist government that doesn't have a state, doesn't have a government, anything like that. And that, according to Marx, this is the natural way of things that were going to happen. And his contention was that after the Industrial Revolution, we were right here in terms of capitalism. We were at what's called late stage capitalism. At some point in the near future, the people are going to rise up and overthrow the wealthy elites. So he actually said that capitalism was needed to make all this work. Capitalism is going to create misery, it's going to make people miserable, and workers are going to get tired of capitalism and it will fall. And finally, his last pillar is revolution. We need to forcibly remove people from power. And revolution is a big part of being a communist society. You need to have that revolt. Okay? By force, understand, not just like a non-political revolution, like a worldwide struggle against people that are wealthy. The government that's supposed to come out of this is supposed to use socialism is called communism. And communism is the government system that uses socialism to make a classless society. What does a communist government actually look like? Well, in Marx's vision, and you'll often hear this called Marxism as well early on, no private property whatsoever. No one owns property. Property is communal. So land, labor, and capital are owned in common, meaning everybody owns land, labor, capital. Everybody decides what to do with it. Okay? There is no economic class. There's no rich, there's no middle, there's no poor, there's no working class, nothing. There is no class. Everybody is equal. There is no government, no country. You're not going to fight for your country, your nation, your government, because that's not real. It doesn't exist anymore. You have no reason to fight for your government. All you have is people that live and work together. Goods and services are going to be based on need. That is sometimes controversial because who needs what and who decides what need is? But in Marx's idea that the community would decide what need is. There is no religion because religion, according to Marx, was basically a way to appease the masses and keep them in check, to keep them down. And everyone cooperates and no one competes at all. This is a true communist system. This is the true communist society, and you needed to revolt against capitalism to eventually get there. There are, of course, revolutions, and there are countries that you give this a try. And what do we know in terms of history? What did Karl Marx get right? Well, what he got right was that capitalism does, in fact, breed inequality. Overall, when people get more capitalist, people get richer, but then there are some people that don't get as rich over time. We find that businesses will try to exploit workers if you don't try to stop them using some form of government. That if free markets are left alone, you'll go through the cycle of really good times and really bad times, boom and a bust, and booms and a bust. He predicted globalization, that around the world we would trade resources, land, labor, and capital, and goods and services and everything else. He said that corporations will attempt to monopolize the market, meaning the companies will attempt just to be the only company in that market. That way they can control prices and things. And we do find that in fact does happen. And that wealthy people will make decisions that ultimately keep them wealthy. He is correct. The companies are self-interested just like anybody else. And ultimately the decisions they're going to make, if they're allowed, is the things that make them stay wealthy. What did Marx not get right, though? Well, he got wrong equality. It never happens. Every time somebody tries to put communism into power, somebody needs to decide who gets what. And it ends up being that you have a bunch of people that are equally poor and some people at the very top that are just perfectly great. And because they're doing the deciding. Tens of millions of people died due to communism and the decisions they made. A lot of them due to famine because you can't get resource. Like if I don't get paid to plant things and I'm just told do it for the community, I'm not going to plant as well as quick as necessary. Capitalism makes goods cheaper. When you mass produce things, goods get actually cheaper. Um, they found out that some government and some choice in combination, not pure government, but some capitalism and some mix of socialism actually does better than pure capitalism and pure socialism. And the bigger message here is the poor, throughout history, it's been pretty much shown the poor don't want to overthrow the wealthy. They want to actually become wealthy. Poor people don't want to kill the rich. Poor people want to become rich. And so it's kind of like, why do I don't want to be equal as everybody else. I want my opportunity to make the big time. And so this is what he got wrong. Um, so all these countries here at the height of the Cold War, so we're talking about the 1960s, this is going to be all the countries that eventually go communist. The biggest communist countries are going to be Russia and China. Now, eventually, this is the peak of communism. The problem is that when you just take like the Soviet Union, Russia, and China, that there are conditions that killed a lot of people because, again, who gets to decide who gets what? So in Russia, you have 30 million people that eventually die in the span of 50 years due to basically really bad government decisions and purges and prisons and torture and exterminations. This isn't even from war. This is not people dying from war. This is just dying from bad policies or repressive policies. In China, you have 65 million people that die over the course of like 20 years because of bad policies, not because of war, because of just bad policies that starve a lot of people, that oppress them, that kill them, that execute them. And these, again, we find that communism over history doesn't do what Marx thought it would do. It just makes a lot of people dead and miserable. So now the current communist states, Cuba is communist, North Korea, China is still communist, but China and Vietnam have something a little different. They actually opened up and became more capitalist in the last 30 years, and that's made them more prosperous. They got considerably wealthier and their people much better off because they became more capitalist. Okay. Now, the thing is that we don't want to say the government is bad. And what Marx kind of gets right is that there are things the government actually does better than just market-based decisions in capitalism. And so later on, more philosophers are like, yeah, Adam Smith kind of had it right. And remember, Adam Smith had a little bit of government is good. But Karl Marx is also right that government should be involved and pure capitalism is going to have a problem. So a couple of things about the benefits of having government as part of your society and your economy. Number one, the government does some things really well. Like, I don't think you can say the government in the United States military is not good. The U.S. military is really good, and that's government. That's the government deciding what to do with goods and services and factors of production. Those land, labor, capital. We make weapons and we train people really well. Operation Warp Speed. We got a COVID vaccine in record time because government jumps in and says, "I'll pay you a bunch of money for the first company to get me a vaccine." That's great. That's the government did a really good job there. Number two, most people actually like quote unquote free. Of course, it's not free; it's still paid for, but goods and services. People like that our military protects them. They like Social Security. They like roads and police and fire and Medicare and high school sports and arts and music. And all this is the government deciding what to do with land, labor, and capital. And people like that they kind of have access to that. Remember, though, it's not free. There is still payment that goes to it. Um, Government does know how to address inequality, but that is complicated about what inequality looks like and how much and who should get what and what plan actually works. And in a democracy, this gets really, really complicated. Government actually helps promote good exchanges. So instead of trading, we have currency, we have money. Okay, that you are safe. You have like stuff that's not put out is going to kill you, like bad food or something that planes has crashed, that kind of thing. They have transparency. You make sure companies are doing things that are true and just and transparent, and you put out like how much workers get paid, that kind of thing. And then finally, things like private property. Like they protect property rights. Like you can't just go and take somebody's land. There's laws against that. If you have a contract with somebody, that contract must stand as valid. And that's part of what the government does. It's good. They prevent monopolies. If two businesses want to get together and run a market, therefore they can control what is produced and at what price, the government steps in and can break up a monopoly. Now, remember, by the way, the government, if it's too aggressive, can be the monopoly. They could be the only one that is actually in the market and does things. And for like schools, remember, most schools in this country are run by the government. And so the government kind of has a monopoly there. Now, this is the upside of government. So you have capitalism, you have communism / socialism. What's the answer? Well, as we get on the history, we understand that capitalist countries are much better off than communist countries. It really isn't close. But these capitalist countries don't have pure capitalism. They have some mix of government. So if you're in a place like France or Canada or Australia, government is much more involved in people's lives. You have a place like Singapore or the United States, former Hong Kong, then government is less involved in people's lives. And again, we don't want to say then, should government decide land, labor, capital, or private people? It's going forward, what combination of people should determine what happens to land, labor, and capital.